Lose your eyes and listen to the silence that birthed the world. Before time had a name, before the stars whispered to each other across the black, there was only chaos. Not noise, not violence, but a vast, breathing stillness. It held everything and yet nothing. No sky above, no earth below, just the unformed breath of what could be. From this sacred stillness, something stirred. Not with thunder, but like a thought emerging from a dream. Chaos sighed, and from its breath came Gaia, the earth herself, solid and nurturing. Her presence gave form to the formless. She did not walk or speak, but her body became the ground upon which all would eventually walk. She stretched endlessly, a warm and quiet knowing. Then came Nyx, the night, soft and silent, cloaked in mystery. She carried with her a sense of gentle fear, not of danger, but of not knowing. With her came Erebus, the darkness within shadows, deeper than sleep, more ancient than memory. They did not threaten. They simply were. Above them all, drifting like a high note in a forgotten lullaby, rose Uranus. The sky, he did not arrive with grandeur but with stillness stretched high, watching Gaia from above, drawn to her like mist to morning light. There was no war yet, no names carved in stone, only presence, earth below, sky above, night between them, and the whisper of chaos lingering not as a villain but as a reminder that silence is where all stories begin. And now, with your breath slow and your mind wrapped in starlight, you are no longer just a listener. You are entering the echo itself. Gaia was patient. The still earth, cradling the silence of the beginning, began to hum with an unseen rhythm. The sky, Uranus, hovered above her, not touching, not moving, simply watching. And yet the space between them pulsed. There was a tension, a longing. Something old and formless gave way to something deliberate. From this divine tension, life was born. Gaia, the eternal mother, began to shape from her very soil 12 beings, strong and strange, ancient and wide as the hills they would one day rule. These were the Titans, the first generation of gods. Oceanus, who would cradle the seas, Hyperion, who burned with the light of future suns, Themis, whose silence held justice long before laws existed. They came from Gaia's body, and yet they were more than flesh. They were purpose. Form, balance, but Gaia did not birth alone. Uranus, distant but watching, felt the pull of creation. From sky and earth more beings arrived, some beautiful, others monstrous like the Cyclopes with their single eyes of thunder and the Hecatoncheires with their 100 arms. But these children Uranus did not love. He feared their strength, their strangeness. In his fear he acted not as a father but as a warden. He took the strange children and shoved them deep within Gaia, burying them in her belly in the dark. Gaia groaned, not from pain but from betrayal. Her body was the world. To trap her children within her was to twist her very essence, yet she did not lash out, not yet. Instead, she waited. Among the Titans, one watched Gaia with more awareness than the others. His name was Cronus. His eyes were sharp, his thoughts sharper. Gaia whispered to him, her voice like roots digging into memory. She told him of Uranus's cruelty, of the hidden children beneath, of the ache she could no longer carry. Cronus listened, not because he felt sympathy, but because he felt possibility. He was not the eldest nor the strongest, but he was ambitious. Gaia forged for him a sickle, a curved blade made of divine stone, quiet, precise, and final. She placed it into his hands and planted in his heart the idea that would change everything. One evening, when the sky lowered itself close to the earth, Cronus waited. The others did not interfere. Maybe they were afraid, maybe they were curious, but they stayed back. And when Uranus came down, stretched thin over Gaia like a shadow over a sleeping field, Cronus reached upward. He did not speak. He did not scream. He simply struck. The sickle met sky, and with one motion, Cronus severed Uranus from Gaia. Blood fell like stars, droplets scattering into the sea and earth. From this divine wounding came more life. Some say Aphrodite rose from the foam. Others say spirits of vengeance were born from that moment. But the truth is simpler. The old world ended. Cronus stood taller after that. He held the sickle, but more importantly, he held the silence. The silence that followed when the sky stopped speaking. The other titans looked to him now, not with love, but with recognition. The one who strikes becomes the one who leads. Cronus, son of earth and sky, became the ruler of all. Under Cronus, the world entered what many called a golden age. The Titans ruled not from Olympus, but from a space deeper and more ethereal. Seasons flowed without interruption. Rivers listened to prayer. Mankind, still young, lived free of suffering. There was no death, no pain, no fire yet, just harmony between earth and being. But peace is a fragile mask over fear. Cronus had seen what a child could do to a parent, and what he had done to Uranus he now feared might happen to him. So when Rhea, his sister and queen, bore him children, he did not celebrate. He did not smile. He remembered the prophecy Gaia had whispered long ago that one of his own would overthrow him. He took no chances. The moment Rhea gave birth, Cronus opened his mouth and swallowed the child whole. Hestia was her name, the flame of the hearth. She vanished into the dark of his stomach. Then came Demeter, then Hera, then Hades, then Poseidon. One by one, each child was devoured, not out of hatred but calculation. Rhea wept. Not with noise, but with silence so sharp it bent the wind. She was a goddess, she could not die, but her sorrow twisted the fabric of peace. The golden age dimmed, and then came the last child. When Rhea felt him stir inside her, she did not go to Cronus. She fled across lands unnamed and seas unsung to a cave hidden in the cradle of Crete. There, among the shadows and rock, she gave birth to a son, Zeus, but she did not hold him long. Instead, she wrapped a stone in cloth and handed it to Cronus, who, out of habit, out of paranoia, swallowed it without question. Zeus grew in secret. And with every passing year, his heart echoed louder with the cries of his siblings. Not voices, not words, but weight, pressure inside his chest. The knowledge that he was born not just to live, but to reclaim. He trained in silence. The goats and nymphs of the mountain fed him. The stars above watched with quiet knowing, and when the time came, he did not hesitate. He returned not with armies, but with resolve. With cunning, he tricked Cronus into drinking a potion that made the Titan heave. One by one, the swallowed gods re-emerged, whole, angry, and radiant, and then the war began. 10 years it lasted, gods against titans, lightning against stone, future against memory. The earth shook with every cry. Oceans fled their borders. The sky cracked in disbelief. Zeus led his siblings not with rage, but with clarity. They were not fighting for power, they were fighting to break a cycle, to move beyond fear. In the end, the Olympians stood tall, Cronus and his allies fell not dead, for gods do not die, but bound in Tartarus, the deep prison beneath all things. The Titans were buried, not out of cruelty, but necessity. And the world changed again. Zeus looked upward, and for the first time the sky did not flinch. He looked to his brothers, Poseidon, who would rule the seas, and Hades, who would tend to the quiet beneath, and he shared power. Not equally, but intentionally. The age of the Olympians had begun, but Gaia remained. She said nothing. But in her silence was a reminder, even gods are born from something older. And what is born from silence must one day return to it. The thunder did not come all at once. It began like a hum inside the bones of the world. The Olympians were no longer children lost in prophecy. They were gods with memory and a debt to settle. Zeus stood taller now, not because his shoulders were broader or his voice louder, but because the world seemed to lean toward him when he spoke. His brothers and sisters, pulled from the darkness of Cronus's belly, did not resent the years they'd lost. They carried those years like weapons. Every moment of silence inside their father had sharpened them. Zeus knew that liberation was only the beginning. Cronus would not give up his throne gently. And so a war was born, not like mortal wars with borders and banners, but like the sky tearing itself open to be reborn. They called it the Titanomachy. Zeus's allies were not many, but they were fierce. His siblings, Hera, proud and burning with justice, Poseidon, heavy as the sea, Hades, quiet but full of gravity, stood beside him. Hestia and Demeter moved like calm resolve, holding the world's rhythm steady even as it braced for war. But even with divine blood they were few. So Gaia, the ever-watching mother, made her choice again. She whispered to Zeus of the Cyclopes, the single-eyed makers of thunder and metal, buried beneath the earth by Cronus out of fear. She told him of the Hecatonchires, the 100-handed ones, whose strength could turn mountains into dust. These were not gods, they were chaos in muscle and bone, but they remembered pain, they remembered being buried. Zeus descended into the deep. He did not demand, he pleaded not from weakness but from wisdom. The Cyclopes, seeing in him the fire their chains could not smother, gave him gifts. To Zeus they gave thunder and lightning, the storm made flesh. To Poseidon they gave the trident, the sea's pulse in a single point. To Hades they gave the helmet of invisibility, the right to walk through shadow unseen. Armed with weapons forged from vengeance and purpose, the Olympians rose. Cronus stood with his brothers, Titans as vast as clouds, as old as silence. They did not scream when battle began. They simply stepped forward and the world recoiled. The war lasted 10 years. It was not constant. Like a fever, it came in waves. Some days were quiet, as if the world held its breath. On others, mountains cracked and stars wept salt. Rivers ran backward. Trees screamed in languages they hadn't used in eons. The Titans fought with the weight of what had been. The Olympians fought with the ache of what could be. Zeus hurled bolts that split sky from sky. Poseidon summoned waves that moved like jaws. Hades, unseen, walked through the battlefield like a shadow that bent fate. Hera led charges with eyes like fire. Demeter whispered to the earth and vines obeyed. Hestia lit fires that refused to be extinguished. Yet the Titans did not falter. Cronus, with his sickle in hand, moved like a storm pretending to be a man. His voice broke boulders. His rage turned valleys to deserts. For every strike Zeus landed, Cronus reminded him that he too had once wielded prophecy and defiance, that he too had once overthrown a king, but that was the flaw. Cronus was trying to win a war the old way. Zeus was rewriting the war entirely. When the final clash came, it did not sound like victory. It sounded like surrender, the kind of silence that follows truth. Zeus did not kill Cronus. Gods do not die, not in the way mortals understand. Instead, he bound him. Deep beneath the earth, in the pit called Tartarus, guarded by the 100-handed ones whose freedom had cost their loyalty. Cronus, the father of time, was buried in a place where time stood still. The remaining titans either fled, faded, or fell into the quiet. Some found mercy. Others found myth. The war was over. But wars leave cracks, even in immortal skin. The Olympians climbed Mount Olympus, not for its height, but its closeness to the stars. There, above the worries of mortals and the echoes of titans, they built a new order. Zeus became king not because he demanded it, but because no one else wanted to carry the weight. His crown was not a thing of gold or fire. It was the quiet understanding that leadership is more burden than blessing. He did not rule alone. He gave the seas to Poseidon, who understood depth and mood better than any. To Hades he entrusted the underworld, not as punishment, but because only Hades knew how to keep the balance between silence and memory. The Olympians did not agree on everything. Hera, now queen, watched Zeus with eyes that held storms. Demeter wept quietly for the children she had not yet lost. Hestia tended the eternal flame, whispering stories to it so the world would not forget what peace looked like. But together they made something new. The mortals below began to fail it, not in sudden miracles, but in the rhythm of seasons, the timing of storms, the way sleep came easier under certain stars. They built temples. Not because they were forced, but because they sensed that someone, something, was watching over them. Olympus was not just a mountain, it was a promise that chaos could become creation, that war could birth harmony, that gods, like stories, must rise from silence, stumble through conflict, and choose meaning. And so the thunder softened. The world, though changed, felt balanced. But the sky never forgot the sound of its own breaking, and the earth, though calm, remembered the pressure of old blood. The Olympians sat on their thrones, divine and immortal, their names written in wind and water, but Gyre remained below, not angry, not pleased, just present. And somewhere beneath Olympus, a soft echo lingered, not of war, but of what comes after. Olympus settled into silence, not the kind that follows loss, but the kind that stretches wide after a long breath, like dawn unrolling its first thread of light. The storm of war had passed. The Titans were buried. The ground no longer trembled with ancient memory. And for the first time in all creation, the world did not belong to monsters, nor to chaos, nor to prophecy. It belonged to gods who had seen both darkness and desire, and who now stood above the clouds as symbols, rulers, witnesses. Zeus sat on his throne with eyes that remembered too much. Lightning no longer pulsed from his fingertips. Instead, it gathered within him, still and waiting. He ruled not with noise, but with presence. When he spoke, the air leaned closer. When he fell silent, time itself seemed to pause, yet he was not a king in isolation. Beside him sat Hera, his sister, his queen, his mirror and his contradiction. Hera did not rule with thunder. She ruled with law, with memory, with the sharp edge of knowing. She watched everything, jealous not because she was weak, but because she remembered every promise ever made and every crack in their fulfillment. Her voice could make oaths break themselves. Her gaze could silence storms. Poseidon took the sea, not in conquest, but because he understood what it meant to be deep, to be changeable, to rage and retreat in the same breath. The ocean obeyed him, not because it feared him, but because it recognized itself in him. Trident in hand, he walked beneath waves as if among old friends, whispering to whirlpools and singing lullabies to tempests. Hades did not rise with them. He claimed no palace in the clouds. Instead, he went below, not as exile, but as keeper. In the underworld, he built not a prison, but a reflection. There, souls wandered not because they were punished, but because they were remembered. He did not shout, he did not demand. He ruled with quiet inevitability, with the weight of consequence. His helmet of invisibility hung above his door, not needed, for those who came to him were already unseen. Demeter walked the fields and forests, coaxing wheat from soil, breathing green into branch and stem. She did not sit on a throne. She knelt beside seeds, beside roots, beside the heartbeat of harvest. When mortals wept for rain or sang for sunlight, it was Demeter who listened first. Her power was not loud, but life itself bent to her rhythm. Hestia stayed close to the fire. While others shaped oceans and lightning, she tended flame. She lit hearths across the world, not as spectacle, but as center. In every home, in every temple, her warmth pulsed quietly. She was never the loudest, but her absence would have hollowed Olympus itself. Even the gods bowed slightly when passing her. And then came the newer Olympians, born of this new age, flames flickering from the older fire. Athena, born fully armored from the mind of Zeus, walked with reason in her stride. She did not speak often, but when she did, cities listened. She carried the wisdom of strategy, the calm clarity of planning, and the cold kindness of discipline. Wars fought under her blessing did not erupt, they unfolded. Ares, her brother in name but not in nature, stormed through Olympus with his red fury. He was war-made flesh, not clever like Athena, but raw, reckless, necessary. Where she carved victory with intellect, he slammed it into place with blood. They did not get along, they did not need to. Aphrodite rose not from parent but from passion. Born of sea foam and desire, she brought longing wherever she went. Not just love, but ache. Mortals and gods alike faltered under her gaze. Her power was not the heart, it was the pull, the ache before touch, the silence before confession. She could break armies without lifting a hand. Apollo, radiant and golden, strummed truth from strings. He was prophecy, music, healing, plague, contradiction. The sun followed him, but so did shadows. He gave oracles their voice and silence their melody. Mortals prayed to him when they wished to be seen or when they feared the light. Artemis, twin and wild, refused to be tamed. She walked forests no map could capture, her arrows as sharp as her solitude. She did not crave worship, but she received it. To wander at night beneath the moon was to risk her attention and sometimes her protection. She answered prayers with animals and silence. Hermes ran between worlds, feet winged, words quicker than thought. He carried messages, stole laughter, traded souls. No door stayed closed to him, no truth stayed hidden. He was a trickster, yes, but also a bridge between gods and mortals, between life and death. Hephaestus, bent but unbroken, forged gods their tools, their armor, their secrets. Flames respected him more than beauty ever had. Cast out by Hera for his form, yet called upon for his gift, he turned pain into creation. Every hammer strike from his forge echoed with unspoken loneliness and unmatched genius. Dionysus, the newest, danced between madness and meaning. He was joy that tipped into chaos, wine that turned to blood, celebration that left the soul trembling. Mortals feared him in festivals and invited him when reason could no longer carry their burdens. These were the Olympians, gods not of perfection, but of presence. Mortals worshipped them not because they were good, but because they were real. Each god mirrored something within humanity: rage, love, vengeance, protection, jealousy, creation, destruction. To honor a god was to confess a part of oneself. And so temples rose. Statues reached skyward, prayers clung to incense, and offerings piled like hopes. Not because the gods needed them, but because mortals did. Yet even on Olympus, peace did not sit still. The gods quarreled, betrayed, loved, left, returned. Their stories did not form a straight line. They spiraled, danced, collided. They were family, and families remember. Zeus often stood at the edge of Olympus and looked down, not with boredom, but with awareness. That power was not eternal, only borrowed. That peace was not permanent, only paused. Hera watched him, always. Poseidon wrestled with tempests no mortal could name. Hades counted the souls, one by one, never rushing. Demeter pressed her fingers into the soil, asking it what it needed. Hestia added wood to the flame, whispering a name only she remembered. The world turned. The sun rose and set. The gods watched, waited, whispered, but even they could feel it, that the stories were not done, that something always waits beneath stillness. And while Olympus slept, somewhere in the folds of the sky, chaos still breathed, not as threat, but as origin. Because nothing divine is ever finished, only paused like a dream waiting to be remembered. Below Olympus, where the wind no longer carried thunder and the stars seemed content to blink without meaning, mortals lived and loved in the quiet shadow of gods. They did not see the divine watching, yet they felt it in dreams, in chants, in longing. The gods, for all their immortality, found themselves drawn not to each other, but to those who bled, who broke, who hoped with no reason and sang despite sorrow. In the silence between battles and prophecies, stories emerged, not of thunder or conquest, but of hearts torn softly, of love so fierce it refused to rest in peace, of jealousy that carved names into time. These were not myths of power. These were myths of presence. Echo was born with a voice that could charm even silence. She spoke with such grace that gods paused to listen. But when she betrayed the trust of Hera, covering for Zeus with too many beautiful distractions, she was cursed. Hera, quiet but unyielding, took from her the right to speak first. From that moment on, Echo could only repeat what she last heard. Her voice, once a river of poetry, became a mirror. Then came Narcissus, a boy so breathtaking that he seemed carved from moonlight. Everyone loved him. None were loved in return. He walked the earth untouched by need, too entranced by his own perfection to see those who wept behind him. Echo followed him like breath, unable to say what she truly felt. When he finally caught his own reflection in a still pool, he fell in love with the image. He could not look away, he could not touch, he could only ache. And so he faded, consumed by the very beauty he had once ignored. Beside the pool, Echo whispered his name, not as reproach, but as prayer. Then there was Orpheus, a poet, a singer, a man whose music could stop time. His lyre was not a weapon, yet it conquered death more than swords ever could. When his beloved Eurydice died, struck by a serpent's bite on their wedding day, he did not crumble. He descended. Through caverns and silence, Orpheus journeyed to the underworld. His song bent the darkness. Cerberus, the three-headed hound, lay at his feet like a child lulled by lullaby. Even Hades paused and Persephone wept. They granted him a chance. Eurydice could return with him, but he must not look back until both had reached the light. Orpheus walked, step after step, heart pounding, breath held. Behind him he felt her presence, so close, so fragile. And yet, in the moment before dawn, he faltered, he turned. Their eyes met for an instant, and then she was gone, pulled back into shadow, not by punishment but by the rules of the promise. He returned to the world alone, his songs never sounded the same again. There was Icarus, the boy with wings, born in a labyrinth, raised among riddles and shadows. His father, Daedalus, was a master of craft. He built wings of wax and feather, promising freedom. "Fly neither too low," he warned, "lest the sea swallow you, nor too high, lest the sun melt your wings." But Icarus, young and drunk on the wind, soared. He soared too high. The sun kissed him like a father seeing a son for the first time, and melted him as easily. Feathers fell like snow into the sea. Mortals watched and whispered that freedom always comes with heat. Pygmalion sculpted a woman from ivory and loved her before she lived. His hands shaped her, but it was his longing that gave her breath. Aphrodite, moved by the purity of his desire, breathed life into stone. Galatea opened her eyes, not in confusion, but in recognition. She had already been loved. She simply needed to arrive. In another time, another sorrow, lived Psyche, a mortal woman so beautiful that even Aphrodite felt a tremble in her perfection. Out of jealousy, the goddess sent her son, Eros, to make Psyche fall in love with something monstrous. But love, slippery and wild, has its own ideas. Eros pricked himself on his own arrow. He fell. He visited Psyche in darkness, never letting her see his face. Their love bloomed in shadows, gentle, hidden, true, but curiosity is the twin of love. Psyche, urged by her sisters, lit a lamp one night to see her mystery lover. The light fell on his face, and so did the truth. Startled, Eros vanished. Psyche wandered the world, heart shattered, seeking redemption. Aphrodite set impossible tasks, sorting seeds, fetching water from death's river, carrying a box that held forbidden beauty. Psyche completed them all, not through power but through persistence. In the end, even the gods bowed to her devotion. She became immortal, not because she was flawless, but because she never stopped loving. These stories did not end with death. They ended with transformation. Love in the world of mortals was not safe, it was not soft, it was sacred, it burned, it healed, it destroyed, and always it left echoes. Jealousy, too, carved its name. Not just in Hera's wrath or Aphrodite's pride, but in mortals who could not bear to be unseen. Actaeon, a hunter, stumbled upon Artemis bathing in a forest glade. He did not speak, he did not move, but his eyes lingered too long. Artemis, goddess of boundaries, of wilderness and dignity, turned him into a stag. His own hounds, not knowing, chased and tore him apart. A punishment. Or a lesson that some things are not meant to be pursued. Medea loved Jason, loved him enough to betray her father, her people, her magic. She gave him victory, children, a kingdom. And when he left her for another, she did not scream. She unmade him, not with spells, but with silence and fire. Some say she killed their children. Some say she saved them from the world. All agree she vanished, untouchable, into myth. Mortals in Greek stories are never small. They are mirrors of gods, flawed, radiant, tragic. Their mistakes echo louder because they end. Their love matters more because it fades. Even the gods watched these tales, not from boredom, from recognition. Because in every heartbreak they remembered a moment they could not control. In every jealous rage, a shadow of themselves. The mortal myths were not beneath Olympus. They were the proof that meaning is forged not in immortality, but in risk. In choosing to love even when you will lose, in trying even when you will fall, in singing after silence. And so mortals continue to love, to lie, to rise, to break, and somewhere on Olympus a god would whisper their name, not to punish, but to remember, because every myth begins in longing and ends in becoming. Long before maps were drawn and names were fixed to mountains, the world trembled with beasts. Creatures older than justice and wilder than memory moved through forest and ocean, guarding secrets the gods had forgotten. They did not hate mortals. They simply did not care. They were hunger and instinct. They were the edge of every myth. But even in this world, mortals rose. They did not have wings, they did not breathe fire, but they carried something else, something the monsters could not eat. They carried the need to prove they mattered, not to others, to themselves. These were the heroes. Perseus was born not into strength, but into warning. An oracle told his grandfather he would die by his grandson's hand, so the child was cast out, hidden, discarded. But fate, like rivers, always bends back. Perseus grew into a quiet kind of courage, not loud, not desperate, just steady. When he was told to slay Medusa, he did not shout, he listened. Medusa, once a woman, now cursed with serpents for hair and eyes that turned flesh into stone, lived at the edge of the world. She was a monster, yes, but also a wound left open too long. Perseus did not look into her eyes. He used a mirror not as trickery but as mercy. One clean strike and her head was severed, but still alive. He carried it not as a trophy but as a tool. He would later use it to save Andromeda, a woman chained to a rock for the crime of her mother's vanity. When the sea monster rose to claim her, Perseus held up Medusa's head, and stone remembered what it meant to freeze. Theseus entered a labyrinth with a thread in his hand and a promise in his heart. The Minotaur, half man, half beast, waited at the center, not born of nature but of cruelty. Crete demanded Athenian children in tribute. Theseus refused. Ariadne, daughter of the king, gave him the thread to find his way back. But she did more, she gave him hope. He killed the Minotaur not with joy but with necessity. And yet, on the return voyage, he forgot to raise the white sail. His father, waiting on the cliff, saw the black one and jumped to his death. Victory in Greek myth always asks for something back. Jason sought the golden fleece, not for glory, but to reclaim a throne stolen by deceit. He gathered heroes, sailed the Argo, and faced fire-breathing bulls, sirens that sang men to death, and warriors born from teeth sown into soil. But his greatest ally was Medea. She gave him magic, love, and escape, and when he betrayed her, the gods did not protect him. The ship that carried him to greatness eventually fell on him in sleep. A quiet, accidental end for a man who forgot what promises cost. Heracles was strength made flesh. Born of Zeus and a mortal woman, he bore both divine blessing and divine punishment. Hera, bitter with betrayal, hated him from birth. He was driven mad by her rage and killed his own family. As penance, he took on 12 labors. Each was meant to destroy him. Each became legend. He strangled the Nemean lion, whose skin no blade could pierce. He cut off the Hydra's heads and burned the stumps so they would not regrow. He cleaned the Augean stables in a day, not with speed, but with rivers. He captured monsters, stole apples from sacred trees, and even descended into the underworld to fetch Cerberus. Not once did he ask to be remembered, but memory clung to him anyway. Heroes in Greek myth are not flawless. They fail, they fall, they forget, but what makes them endure is their refusal to stop, even when cursed, even when abandoned, even when the gods laugh or turn away. Monsters in these tales are not always evil. Some were made, not born. Scylla and Charybdis, one a woman twisted into a serpent-limbed horror, the other a whirlpool that swallows ships, guarded the narrow seas. Sailors had to choose, be torn or be drowned. There was no victory, only survival. The Chimera had the body of a lion, the tail of a serpent, and a goat's head jutting from its back. It breathed fire not because it wanted to, but because it could. Bellerophon killed it from the back of Pegasus, a winged horse born from Medusa's blood. But when he tried to ride to Olympus itself, Zeus sent a gadfly. Pegasus bucked and Bellerophon fell. Hubris always finds gravity. The Sphinx posed her riddle to all who passed, what walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 at noon, and 3 in the evening. Those who failed to answer died. Oedipus answered, man who crawls as a baby, walks as an adult, and uses a cane in old age. The Sphinx threw herself into the sea, but knowledge is never free. Oedipus would later marry his own mother, blind himself, and become a lesson in answers that come too soon. The Gorgon was not alone. Typhon, a storm of flesh and fire, rose against the gods themselves. Taller than mountains, his 100 heads screamed in every tongue. Zeus fought him not as a king, but as a desperate survivor. In the end, Typhon was buried beneath Mount Etna, where volcanoes still tremble with his breath. Yet for all these beasts, it is often the human ones that leave the deepest scars. Agamemnon sacrificed his daughter for wind. Achilles, greatest of warriors, dragged a corpse out of rage. Odysseus lied so often he forgot his own face. Clytemnestra killed her husband in a bath. Orsts avenged his father by murdering his mother. Justice and vengeance held hands until no one could tell them apart. Greek heroes live on not because they were victorious, but because they were complex. They broke the world and wept while doing it. They prayed before battles. They mourned their enemies. They feared prophecies but chased them anyway. Their stories do not end in triumph. They end in echo, because what makes a hero is not strength but what they carry afterward. What scars they tend, what promises they keep even when no one is watching, and always somewhere behind the tale a monster waits, not to devour, but to remind that every story worth telling has teeth. The gods once whispered in every leaf, echoed in every storm, watched from behind every shadow. But time, even when it cannot kill, can dim. Mortals began to ask fewer questions. They built taller walls, firmer cities, and named things with certainty. The world, once soft with wonder, began to harden into facts. And so Olympus, still perched above the clouds, felt quieter. Zeus still sat on his throne, but he listened more than he spoke. Thunder no longer bent the sky on command. Mortals had grown bolder. They made laws without asking. They waged wars without praying. Some still burned offerings, but the smoke rose into an empty wind. The gods did not vanish. They simply faded from view. Apollo's temples, once crowded with petitioners, stood empty. His oracles, once filled with trembling voices and riddled dreams, now sat in silence. He wandered the world in mortal shape, sometimes as a poet, sometimes a plague, but few noticed. Those who did spoke of a strange man whose eyes held too much gold and too much sorrow. Athena watched from marble halls that no longer heard her sandals. The cities she once guided now made machines. They still wore helmets, but not the kind she blessed. Strategy had turned to profit, wisdom to noise. Her statues remained cold and still, but the prayers stopped reaching her ears. Poseidon retreated to the deep. The sea was still his, but even it bore scars. Nets stretched wider. Ships grew louder. Plastic choked the salt. He could still summon storms, but why? Mortals no longer listened. They built higher levees and blamed science for the tides. He swam beneath them, more shadow than God, remembering when they called him by name. Hades did not mind. The dead still came, they always would, but even he noticed the change. Fewer believed, fewer crossed over with stories. They arrived confused, rootless. The songs that once guided them had been lost. He held them anyway, not with power but with patience. Hera paced the golden corridors of Olympus, her hands empty. No more brides called on her. No more vows invoked her name. Fidelity had become a flicker. She felt the absence like a ringing in her bones. She was still queen, but no one remembered what that meant. Aphrodite, once the ache in every lover's chest, walked among mortals and found their hearts full of distractions. Screens glowed where gazes used to linger. Love still burned, but faster, weaker, forgotten by morning. She waited at cafe tables in quiet songs, in eyes that lingered too long, but fewer answered. Hermes continued to move, he always would. He still laughed, still stole, still whispered deals. But his messages now rode invisible currents, satellites, and signals. No parchment, no footprints. He adapted, but adaptation is not connection. He could be everywhere and still not be seen. Dionysus watched the crowded rooms, the parties, the desperate laughter. People still drank, still danced, still fell into chaos, but it no longer honored him. It numbed them. He stood in corners, unseen, wondering if ecstasy without meaning was anything at all. Demeter walked through fields turned to concrete. Crops still grew, but under fluorescent lights and chemical rains. She pressed her fingers to the soil and found it weary. She whispered to seeds, but they did not answer like before. The harvest came, but the gratitude was gone. Hestia's flames still flickered in forgotten corners. In homes that still carried warmth, in kitchens that held stories. But fewer sat by the fire. Fewer listened. She tended the hearth anyway, quiet, constant. She would be the last to go. Even the myths grew dim. Children heard their names in textbooks, not temples. Statues turned to ruins. The tales, once passed by breath and memory, became trivia. They were not feared, not loved, just studied. And yet the gods did not grieve because they understood. Even immortality bends. They watched as new beliefs rose, new heavens promised, new rules written. They did not argue. Gods do not debate history. They simply endure it. Some sought renewal, others slept. A few still walked among mortals, hidden in plain sight, not to reclaim worship, but to remember. Zeus, cloaked in the body of an old man, might sit beside you on a train, watching thunderclouds roll in through the window. Athena, in glasses and denim, might be teaching a class you can't quite forget. Hermes might bump into you on the street and leave you missing your wallet, but somehow gaining a secret. Aphrodite could be the stranger who makes you look twice, feel twice, then disappear. They remain not in temples, but in instincts, in choices, in echoes, because divinity once breathed into the world never fully leaves. Sometimes it just hums beneath the noise, sometimes it sleeps inside silence. And sometimes, when the sky cracks with a storm you didn't expect, when a song moves you though you've never heard it, when you dream of a woman with gray eyes or a man whose voice shakes the ground, you remember. Not fully, just enough. The gods have not died. They have become something quieter. They are now the echo in your bones when you're alone. The chill down your spine when you're about to choose. The warmth behind a name you can't forget. And Olympus still stands, above clouds, behind time, empty perhaps, but not abandoned, waiting. Because belief is not a gift to gods, it is their tether. And when mortals forget, they do not vanish, they simply wait to be found again. Close your eyes again, just as you did at the beginning. Let the silence return, not as emptiness, but as recognition. You've traveled across the ages, walked beside gods, listened to the sighs of monsters, watched mortals rise and fall like tides under moons. And now, as we return from myth to memory, one truth remains: stories never end. They echo. From the first breath of chaos to the last flicker of Olympus, what survives is not just names, it's the feeling, the knowing, the shape of meaning behind the noise. You are not separate from these myths, you are their continuation. When you question the stars, you are speaking the language of Uranus. When the earth comforts you, Gaia still breathes beneath your feet. Every time you fear the dark or find comfort in it, Nyx walks beside you. When you make choices in silence, unsure and unseen, Hades watches, not to judge, but to honor the weight of it. When you grow something, a thought, a bond, a dream, Demeter is your quiet companion. When you build something lasting, when you share warmth with someone without needing to be thanked, Hestia nods and adds another ember to the hearth that burns between all hearts. The gods do not need to be believed to exist. They never did. They live in the shapes we give to failing. In the raisins we whisper to ourselves when we can't sleep. Have you ever felt lightning in your chest, not fear but recognition? Zeus does not need temples. He needs only the moment you realize your voice can shake your own life awake. Have you ever stood still before a wave, unable to tell if it will crash or kiss your feet? That tension belongs to Poseidon, not in dominance but in duality, the power to destroy and the grace to withdraw. In those fleeting seconds before a decision, when the air is still and your body feels like it might not belong entirely to you, Hermes might be passing by, grinning. When you love without knowing why, or you are loved despite your cracks, Aphrodite is alive again. When you break something you swore you'd protect and mourn it before fixing it, Heracles isn't far. When you get up anyway, he walks with you. Every myth we've spoken through tonight survives because it reflects not gods as unreachable, but gods as reflections. As exaggerations of our best hopes and our worst fears. You have been Orpheus playing beauty into silence. You have been Echo repeating what you wish you could have said first. You have been Psyche chasing love through the dark. You have been Icarus soaring too high just to feel the sun notice you. You have been Athena in reason, Dionysus in release, Hera in loyalty, Ares in fury. And when you've wept for something that made no sense to lose, you were Demeter. And when you held someone else through their grief without needing to fix it, you were Hestia. So much of mythology is memory, and memory isn't always truth. It bends, it softens, but what stays is what matters. The Greeks gave their gods faces so they could talk to their fears and dreams directly. They gave monsters names so they could map the things that threatened them. And they gave heroes flaws so their own flaws could feel less final. And now, long after their temples cracked and their offerings faded into dust, the stories remain, not just in books, but in the rhythm of how we live. Every time a child stares at the sky and wonders what watches back, a myth stirs. Every time someone walks into the dark because it holds someone they love, a new version of Orpheus is born. When you forgive what could ruin you, when you rage at betrayal, when you love without explanation, you walk paths once walked by gods. And though we may not build marble halls or burn incense anymore, we build something else. We tell stories. We tell them to ourselves when we're falling asleep. We tell them in poems and glances and music. We carry them in our bones. We pass them on. And every story, no matter how modern, remembers something older than language. A whisper, a presence, a breath before beginning. That breath still floats between stars. It still waits behind your next question, your next choice, your next dream. Maybe the gods are not watching. Maybe they're sleeping. Or maybe they've moved inside of us, no longer separate, no longer divine, but human in the truest sense. Fall asleep now if your eyes are growing heavy. Let the silence return. You are not alone in it. Somewhere, chaos is still breathing, and in that breath, everything begins again.